Okay, hi everybody. Sorry about the slightly late start. I had some problems with Microsoft, with Firefox, and then later on I had to go to Chrome. You don't care. So can everybody see me? Please put something in the text if you can see me. Let's see if this is working. Oop. Oop. It says it's live. Let's see if it's I better mute myself. Okay, Evan says yes. Okay, excellent. So it says it's live. Shut up, self. Okay, so let's talk about period one. Period one is going to be 1450 to 1648. Of course, that starts with the Renaissance. And with the Renaissance, most people remember it pretty well because honestly, like I said in class, you guys were you were very with it back then, let us say. So is there anybody who has any questions about Le Renaissance? Who's 360 Tsunami? People are still saying yes. Maybe there's a delay. So anyway, anybody has any questions about that? Also, who's Julian Mendoza? I'm trying to write down everybody that's participating, and I got some people I don't recognize. Yes, everybody is still saying yes. So yep, everybody just still saying yep and yes. Does that mean yes, we have questions about the Renaissance? Or is it like, yes, oh, Adrian from third period. There is a delay. So anyway, big thing about the Renaissance, I think I wrote down everybody. Arthur said no. Well, I guess I'll just start talking about the Renaissance. Oh, from Miss Sanders' class. Well, welcome, Julian, from Miss Sanders' class. Yes, the question was though, not can you see me? That's over. We know, I know you can see me. Any questions about the Renaissance? So let's start with Renaissance. Of course, usually our date for the beginning of the Renaissance is 1450. Because it roughly approximates to the beginning of the printing revolution that begins with who? Anybody remember? Oh, there's a delay so much that there's no point. With Gutenberg. Gutenberg invents the printing press. He perfects the movable printing. That's already been around for a while, quite frankly. So it's not like he invents the whole concept of printing. But okay, so there's not that much delay. Yeah, Johann. I like that you're on a first name basis with him, Anastasia. Anyway, when he creates the ability to do printing, the printing press with the movable type, they start being able to create literature in not only a mass-produced form that isn't hand-copied by monks or some scholars and whatnot, but instead people who are able to start putting in vernacular. And the vernacular, of course, is the common languages. So you start seeing things published in French, for instance, and you start seeing works that are geared towards not just an ecclesiastical or religious audience, but instead a common, a popular audience. And some of those early works are like the Courtier by Castiglione, The Prince by Machiavelli. These are all things that that would qualify as Renaissance literature. But the content of Renaissance literature is spread there, and it's not, like I said, not just church-based, not just ecclesiastical, not just religious, but secular, focused on matters of life on earth. In the Middle Ages, there was this conception that everything had to be focused around the church and your life after you die in heaven and living a good life here. And it was accepted, your life on earth is going to suck, but when you move on, then it's going to get good. So by moving the Renaissance emphasis to a more secular, let's enjoy things here, let's party, let's appreciate good food, let's start publishing books like the Courtier that are focused on manners and how to act in contemporary society. That sort of thing really changes everything, because now people are reading and discussing things, and it's kind of become like, hey, it's okay to be able to focus on life on earth. And the art reflects that as well. Now, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. It'd be better if you ask questions, frankly, because you ask the question, I get it, and then I can answer it. If I ask a question, there's like a 10, 15-second delay where I just sit here, look like an idiot. So please ask questions. But does anybody remember the main family that was responsible for patronage in Florence, where most people say the Renaissance kind of began? Okay, that's one question. Second, name me at least one Renaissance artist and one significant work by said artist. Oh, boom, Medici. Look at all you guys with your Medici talk. Good job. And of course, patronage is when people are giving money to glorify themselves and their families. Again, not just in order to be like, oh, hey, you know, God is great, allow me to glorify him, but instead to say like, hey, I'm so dope, I'm going to get Leonardo da Vinci. You might have heard of him. He's important. He, as Luke said, the Mona Lisa, the Sistine Chapel, you goose. I'm going to get me some Leonardo da Vinci, and I'm going to snag that boy, and he's going to come over, and he's going to paint a fancy thing for me. And this shows everybody how wealthy and affluent I am to everybody else. And the artists themselves were celebrities. They were not, so modest they didn't even sign their work. It was like, no, it's a big deal. Michelangelo, the Pope approached Michelangelo with respect. The Pope did, because Michelangelo was a big deal. And of course, I just mentioned two of them that you guys mentioned. Leonardo da Vinci. Of course, da Vinci is where he's from. He's from Vinci. That guy is a Renaissance man. Sometimes he is referred to as. He is a fella that is a sculptor, an inventor, a painter, a writer, a poet. He's doing everything. And he kind of epitomizes that feeling that the Renaissance is like, hey, let's focus on worldly stuff. And of course, it's influenced by something else, a desire to look back, to look forward. What was the thing that inspired our boys in the Renaissance, our Leonardos, our Michelangelos, and all of that? What was it a rebirth of? That's literally what Renaissance means. So when it says rebirth, what is a rebirth? Humanism, certainly, and it is humanism, but humanism is the study of, the Greeks and the Romans, absolutely. They study the Greeks and the Romans, and then they bring that back as far as culturally. So you have people saying like, hey, we need to study this Greek and Roman stuff. Some people, including Luther, because he does all tie together, are like, hey, we shouldn't just accept what they tell us. I'm going to read the original Latin. I'm going to read the original Greek, which actually would have come before the Latin. And I'm going to do my own translations. And I'm going to try to figure out what is the best way to interpret the Word of God. And it's amazing how this changes the whole game, because now people are like, okay, well, let's study the past and let's figure out how we can be better people, because the Renaissance sees the interim period between the classical, the Greek and Roman era, and their current era of the 15th century or so as a dark age where ignorance and superstition have clouded everybody's minds. And because of that, they are like, well, okay, let's move to this. Let's go back to when it was good, the Greeks and Romans. And it's kind of hipsterish of them, quite frankly, to be like, oh, actually, I prefer Greek stuff. Maybe you've heard of Aeschylus. He's a very, very excellent author. You've probably never heard of him. And it really does change the entire way of thinking. Now, question. What is the difference between the Italian Renaissance and the Northern Renaissance? I will pause whilst people type, because no one has asked a question yet. But you're fast with the Medici stuff. You're not fast with this one. So, like, if I'm in the Northern Renaissance, I'm more likely to Christianity. Yeah, actually, the Northern Renaissance has more emphasis on Christian piety. North was more religious, whereas the South, the Italians, the birthplace of the Christian church for all intents and purposes. I know if you're gonna actually me, I know that that's a generalization, but just go with it. But the Italian Renaissance is more secular. They use more Greek and Roman symbolism. You have Greek and Roman goddesses being thrown in there and their literature is more like, hey, what's courtly life like and stuff like that. Whereas in the North, you got guys like, give me an example of a religious Northern Renaissance boy. Give me one. We talked about a couple in class. The art itself is still very beautiful. It's still very wonderful. The topics, as some people have said, are sometimes more dealing with everyday life. For example, Peter Bruegel. Is that how you say his name? Bruegel, my wife says. He's going to be focused on everyday life. Sometimes the lot of the peasants. Sometimes he'll do like guys like Jean von Eyck, as Arthur just said. Who is that? How you say his name? Van Eyck. My wife says. My wife. She's here. She just doesn't want to be on camera, but she's here to correct my pronunciation. And we'll say Eck because it sounds like it's written. And he does like the wedding portrait of Arnolfini. Remember that, where he's got those two ugly people, the lady's faking being pregnant. Now moving to literature, which is the question. Now I've got a couple of answers here. Looks like one person, it looks like Anastasia did nail that. It was Desiderius Erasmus. Great name for a kid, Desiderius. Desiderius Erasmus comes up with this whole, hey guys, the church right now is flawed. We should be more like Christ. And how am I going to do that? I'm going to study the classics. I'm going to study the original biblical texts. I'm going to learn my Greek and my Latin instead of just, speaking the vernacular. Uh-oh. Angry puppies. Just a second. Sorry, dogs were upset. Yeah, Thomas More. You got boys like Thomas More who writes Utopia. They're good boys. And Thomas More writes Utopia. and Utopia is focused on, hey, we could have this perfect society. But Utopia is a little, he's being ironic there because Utopia is a word that means nowhere. So he describes this perfect society, but also the implication within the name is it cannot ever exist. He and Erasmus are criticizing through satire Henry VIII, Anastasia. But yes, and he did get executed. But to be honest, not for, it was like what you said, not for Utopia, but because he was very critical. He refused to go along with Henry's plans. But yeah, Thomas More and these guys, they are going to be more focused on living a more pious or religious or holy life, whereas your boys in the South are more like, you know what, here's how to be a better ruler. That's Machiavelli. As far as what to study on the test and who to know, Thomas More, Desiderius Erasmus, Niccolo Machiavelli. Those three should be your triumvirate that you know and you know well. They sometimes will sneak someone else in, but if you know that if it's from the North, and if you look at the attribution line in the multiple choice question or whatever, they'll say like, oh, Dutch author, 1520. Well, then you know he's a Dutch author, he's from the North, and he's in 1520, so that's Renaissance-y times. He's going to be Northern Renaissance. So he's probably going to be focused on piety and that sort of thing. That's my wife. Not the lunchbox. That lunchbox is just a new lunchbox I got. The lady in the back. So yeah, The Prince by Machiavelli is often cited as kind of a manual of how to live your life, how to be a good person.
Let me know we read the spelling test.
And the emphasis there is that he's like, look, you don't have to be a good person. In fact, sometimes that's going to slow you down if you're a good person. Do what's effective.
James, please.
That's the that should be kind of the emphasis there, is do what is effective, not what is necessarily moral. The purpose of the ruler is to provide security for the people, as Anastasia said, not necessarily to lead a good example. Although he might add, Machiavelli would say, you do need to appear to be religious because that's what the people want, but you need to be effective. That's what people need. And of course, our other guy, Desiderius Erasmus, critical of the church. Some see him as kind of a prologue, like a guy who comes first before Luther. Although Erasmus was a Catholic monk that never had any intention of leaving the Catholic Church. In fact, he was critical of Luther because Luther was kind of a fanboy, and he was like, yo, Erasmus, what you think, bro? And Erasmus was like, actually, I think you went too far. I think that you should have stayed in your lane and maybe not gotten all uppity and tried to, leave the church and all of that. We want to reconcile what's good about the church and fix what's bad about the church, repair it, not tear it down and start over again. And yeah, he's got that. Anastasia, I see you're influenced by your Virginia origins with your yeehaw comment. All right. Any questions about the Renaissance? That's all I was going to say about the Renaissance, unless somebody wants to hit me up with a Renaissance-y question. So I'll pause for a moment for a Renaissance question. I'm recording myself, watching myself, recording myself. It's very, very meta. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Again, I'm assuming you guys remember most of that stuff. So the Reformation begins when Martin Luther is ticked off about indulgences. Now, okay, now I'm getting my questions. Okay. Whoa. Okay, so Nicole's question, who are the top 3 guys that you should definitely know? Erasmus, Machiavelli, More, Thomas More. Those three boys right there. If you want to go deeper, Castiglione is good. He's the courtier, Renaissance manual for manners. You could also, Christine de Pizan, the AP test is written generally by social historians that want to emphasize the role of women. And women, due to sexism and lack of opportunity, are often underrepresented. So if you encounter a female that is of note in literature, politics, art, anything like that, it's always a good idea to pay attention, because the AP people have a bias. They don't acknowledge it, but it's true when they're writing their tests. So Christine de Pizan, she writes a book called The City of Ladies. She had been educated by her father. Her father paid for a tutor for her, which is unusual for the time. And she writes a thing where basically she says, look, men treat women terribly. She doesn't say women deserve to be equal to men, but she advocates for education for women and a larger role for women. So she stops right at the cusp of it. It's a little too early socially for her to, I think, go the whole way and try to get more rights. Will there be a DBQ on the Renaissance? I doubt it. It's technically possible, but what are they going to ask? I mean, nobody knows. Okay, nobody knows what it'll be on. Could be about the Renaissance. Everybody would love it if it's about the Renaissance, but they tend to like questions where they can pull in some social stuff. And the fact that the role of women during the Renaissance is relatively minor kind of precludes it from being a good topic for them. Although they could, who knows though? Do you need to know the details of the artists? Frankly, if you know humanism, secularism, and the emphasis on individualism, which is to paint people as they actually looked with all their flaws and everything, I think you're good as far as the artists go. Anaya probably. Are you from Sanders' class? I'll go ahead and write down your name too, Anaya, if it's not that.
I'd like to eat dinner, please, not sooner than later.
Thank you, Ryan, for complimenting my house. What secularism? Oh, that's a good question. What secularism? Secularism, before I answer Anaya's question, is non-godly stuff. So emphasis on life on earth. Leisure activities during the Renaissance. They were kind of trash back then. So beyond your moral stuff like religion and whatnot, it was pretty much drinking and like watching animals fight to the death. And yeah, that was it. Leisure activities. It ain't great. It doesn't really get better for a while. Sad. Naya, yeah. Animal Fights is real life Pokemon, except Pokemon are friends, as we learned from the storyline in every single Pokemon game, and they shouldn't just be exploited. They should be cared for. Okay, so what are the questions? I think that's everybody. What are these from? This is sympathy cards, but oh, this is my daughter's birthday. My daughter's birthday is in October. It's currently April, but we still have these up. Okay, that was my stall in case anybody. The first major war that leads into the Henry line of kings. That would be the War of the Roses, RV. I wouldn't worry too much about the War of the Roses. They could ask about that, but honestly, I don't really see them doing it except as a way of getting to the new monarchs. The new monarchs are these monarchs from the time period that are kind of emphasis on what we think of as kings being like today. They start trying to curb the power of the nobles a bit because during the Middle Ages, the king is kind of like first among nobles. Evan's right about the Game of Thrones reference. Please no Game of Thrones stuff, because seriously, I haven't watched the last 2 episodes because I couldn't watch them because I was out of region. So please don't think about Game of Thrones. Anyway, the War of the Roses leads to Charles VII, for example, in France. Henry VII. No. Yeah, it's Charles VII. And Louis XI in France. Henry VII in England. And Ferdinand and Isabella. They're always trying to control the nobles. You might remember at the beginning of the year, we did a project about them. They were basically trying to take the power away from the nobles. Ferdinand and Isabella did this through having random brotherhoods, they were called, made up of people that would patrol and create justice. You had others that were trying to kind of push for, like, hey, maybe we'll tax the nobles more. We'll put a land tax on, like the French King Charles VII. That's the gabelle. I'm probably mispronouncing it, as well as the tile, which is a salt tax. Maybe I got those mixed up. And this is going to affect the rich more than it's going to affect the poor. This is a way of kind of being like, look, I'm the king. King's up, nobles down. So yeah. Henry chronology for now, Ryan, is just Henry VII leads to Henry VIII. Oh, you mean like the Henry boys, his daughters and sons and stuff. Son, singular. Yeah, in a second. Anyway, I can't really imagine them going too much into the War of the Roses, except to get to the New Monarchs. And really, the New Monarchs is not super complicated. It's just, hey, these people are trying to keep the nobles down. They're trying to establish conformity within their own nations. Most famously, a good example of this would be the Reconquista in Spain. All right, my dog's barking again. I'm going to go let him in. Meanwhile, enjoy my BB-8. Okay. Come on, boys. Come on, boys. Come on, boys. Come on, boys. Come on. Who's a good boy? Oh, you're a good boy. Yes, I know you smell. You smell very bad. How do you smell bad? From just walking outside. It's ridiculous. Okay, which dog do I bring up? How about Liebman? How about Liebman? He's a good one. He's the king of all the dogs. He's the king of the dogs. Hi, say hello to your public. All right, so anyway, so I don't want to talk about Henry until we talk about Luther. So Luther begins with the Reformation. He's upset about indulgences. I just said that, you goose. It is English. Oh, I was talking about the New Monarchs. That's where you got lost. Okay, pausing for a second, going back. The Charles VII and all those other people I was talking about, and the Reconquista, which is reconquering the peninsula, getting rid of the Muslims and Jews, making it a Catholic exclusively kind of thing. That is the New Monarchs in general. Coming out of the War of the Roses, that's Henry VII, basically. You happy, babe? Okay. What was the other question there? The Concordat of Bologna. Concordat of Bologna is basically establishing the right of the French king to have some power over the church within France in order to appoint his own bishops. It's there, but I wouldn't fret about it too much. Review books always fret about stuff like that. Honestly, people get stuck on much easier topics than that. Okay, so back to Luther. Okay, time in. Luther is upset about indulgences. He feels not that the Pope doesn't have the right to, but that the Pope shouldn't be granting salvation to those who are paying for it. He feels that that's an abuse of power, and he feels that it disproportionately favors the rich. So, and it kind of does, because it's essentially saying like, hey, if you give me money for this piece of paper, you get out of purgatory sooner. And this gives you a an unfair advantage. Like poor people, you know, you're not going to be able to get out of purgatory for as long or whatever, or maybe not be able to afford it at all. Of course, they also extend it to dead relatives, your mother, your father, you know, whoever, who are already dead. So they use guilt as another method to sell indulgences. And Martin Luther basically says, nah, don't like that. And he writes up this like angry post where he literally a post because he nails it to the door. And he says, guys, I'm awesome and I know things because I have a PhD in theology, and I do not feel that you are right. And it goes through, there's 95 different points basically where he indicates that he is he's right and the Pope is wrong. Now, of course, it was addressed to the Archbishop Albert of Mainz, who had loaned the Pope money. He's the one who authorized the indulgences, although the Pope signed off on them, because the Archbishop Albert of Mainz loaned money to the Pope in order for the Pope to build St. Peter's Basilica. Of course, that's the fancy place up there, fancy church in Rome. What do you mean it froze? What are you talking about froze? Okay. Oh, Shelwyn's here. I see. Shelwyn. All right. So, I'll go here so you can actually see my paper. It's important. So, anyway, so Luther writes these 95 theses. He posts them to the door of Albert. And this happens on October 31st, 1517. And am I still frozen? I hope I'm not frozen. And this leads to a big debate. The Pope asks him to take it back. He refuses to take it back. As a result of refusing to take it back, eventually he is summoned to the Diet of Worms by the Holy Roman Emperor, who holds dominion over the German states, which, of course, Luther is German, so be over him. And that's in 1521. There you go. And that leads to Luther finally saying, look, I'm denouncing the Pope. The Pope has made all kinds of errors. He is not infallible. He is supposed to be God's instrument on earth, and yet the popes have done some wicked things. And when he says wicked things, he's not just talking about the current Pope at the time, who's Leo X, but he's talking about the previous ones, like Alexander VI, the Borgia Pope. He's the one that was in A World Lit Only by Fire, that they talk a lot about the naughty stuff he did. And Julius II, who was obsessed with warfare and enriching himself at the expense of others, things like that. So he did say he was the devil. So Luther kind of strikes off on his own, starts his own religion, translates the Bible into German, again, the vernacular, the common language, and begins to get a fairly good hold on the people of Northern Europe. Southern Europe is very solidly Catholic. Eastern Europe, very solidly Catholic. Western Europe, a little more iffy, but France and Spain, very, very Catholic. He's mostly effective in the Netherlands and in northern Germany, which is a lot. It's a lot of people. I'm not downplaying it. He's still around today, Lutheranism, so I'm not downplaying it. But he inspires others. Now, one of the people he inspires, someone just wrote there, Luther did think everybody should read Scripture. That's why he translated it into a language that people would be able to understand. He was definitely into that. You guys see what a good boy he is. Okay, so education situation at this time would be that if you were rich, you had a private tutor, Because of the Renaissance, you were learning Greek and you were learning Latin, probably. But beyond that, if you weren't rich, probably not. So not a big deal for them. But Luther was like, hey, you should preach, not just in like, don't just do the mass in Latin. Just preach to them and tell them the stories of the Bible. Explain it so they can learn the stories and they can be benefited by God. And he changes the emphasis from saying like, hey, you have to get salvation from the church, to saying like, yeah, the church helps, but also you can have an individual relationship with God. And I've noticed over the years that many students kind of go like, well, yeah, that's religion. You're probably Protestant if you think that. If you think that you should probably go to confession and it was important to go to church or else you probably weren't going to go to heaven, then you probably are not Protestant, putting it that way. Like I do not know the exact literacy rate off the top of my head. Google does. Anyway, some people, Shelwyn brought up the German Peasants' War. The peasants did revolt. They were inspired by Luther to rise up against the nobles. They wanted more rights. They saw Luther as challenging the basis of authority. And he's like, all right, let's do this. Let's do this. And at first, Luther is like, bros, I like it. You got a lot of good energy here. I'm enjoying this revolution. But then he's like, wait a second. If these people rise up against the nobles, and the nobles are the ones literally keeping me safe from the Pope and his agents, this might be bad for Luther. So maybe I don't want to focus on the poor people that can't protect me at all and won't really lead to my religion spreading, but instead I should focus on the people that can actually do something for me. And then he writes a book, a little tract called On the Murdering, Thieving Hordes of Peasants, where he basically says, know your role, shut your mouth, you're all going to go to hell if you rise up against the nobles. This works. Yeah, German nobility after this is even more strengthened. It was strong enough to crush the revolt, but yeah, I can agree with that, I guess, in kind of a vague kind of way. Other people Luther inspires. The big two are John Calvin and Thomas Munzer. Now, Thomas Munzer, you might not recognize that name, but you might recognize the Anabaptists. The Anabaptists are important in that they show up on the AP test disproportionately over the past 30 years. Nobody can figure out their obsession with the Anabaptists. I'm not against the Anabaptists. They are important, but they're like the modern day like Mennonites and Amish. And it's like, okay, that's important, but maybe Luther's more important. Maybe Calvin's more important. The Anabaptists were like, listen, guys, we're with Luther, but we're going to go a little further. Women should be able to preach. Also, baptism shouldn't be done when you're a baby. It should be done when you're an adult. Anabaptist, it's right there in the name. The whole thing with the Anabaptists is they're weirdos. Even for the time period, everybody hates them. The Catholics hate them because they're Protestant. The Protestants hate them because they're like, well, you're not our kind of Protestant. They're anti-war, so they're frequently targeted, and they don't fight back very well because they're anti-war. And so they end up being highly influential to later sects. That's S-E-C-T, plural. But they're not especially, like, at the time, like no major leaders or anybody really goes Anabaptist. Calvinist followings, though, are found in France, and it really takes hold in the Netherlands. Calvin, his big deal is he says, look, human beings, you're naturally very sinful. You need to get yourself in line, understand that your relationship with God is not like a happy, loving one. You need to just assume that, like, listen, everybody is just I hope it works out for you. I hope you're not damned to hell. Fortunately, God, who knows everything and is all-powerful, has already decided the Calvinists are the right ones. And so we are predestined to go to heaven. And people are like, wait, how do you know? It's like, because obviously we're right. So you could see where that would be a little problematic to some people. Calvinism is, I think if you just look at the way that he advised people to work within their own relationships. Like Calvin said, listen, the only time you should be with, you know what I mean, your wife is when you're trying to make a baby. Even that is sinful, and just doing that for fun. Oh, no, 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 no. Like if you look at it from that perspective, you go like, oh, John Calvin was very strict, and homie was strict. He did briefly take over Geneva, not as a hostile takeover. They invited him in, and they allowed him to run the city. He runs it as a theocracy, which would be which would basically be a church in charge. In this case, the Calvinist church in charge, and he is extremely strict. He burns heretics, people who are against his teachings, at the stake. He is not a nice man in some ways. Predestination, of course, I already mentioned that, but that's the big distinction between Calvinism and the other stuff. Now, just now, Shelwyn said Huguenots, Presbyterians, Puritans, those guys are all Calvinists. And essentially, yes, those guys are all Calvinists. Again, another example of Calvinism. They outlaw Christmas. Okay, when Charles the First is killed and Oliver Cromwell takes over as part of the English Civil War, after the English Civil War, he outlaws Christmas and establishes a puritanical dictatorship that forbids makeup, sports, anything musical, because it's all sinful and takes people away from their devotions to God. Modern day Presbyterians are Presbyterians because they're still around, you goose. Basically, Presbyterianism is Scottish Calvinism, and that comes from John Knox, who's Kate, first period Kate. Her dog is named Knox. So if you have any questions about that, ask Kate's dog. But yeah, Huguenots are French Calvinists, make up about 10-15% of the population over there. Persecuted highly by the Calvinists, no, by the Catholics. Sorry, I got in the habit of saying Calvinist. Oh, yeah, Presbyterians are Scottish Calvinists, yeah. England, France, Calvinists, differences in belief. Not really, it's basically the same. Basically the same. I'm sure there's minor doctrinal differences, but it's basically the same. So there's that. The Huguenots will get into trouble because this is the era of religious warfare. And as such, religious warfare is going to be all over Europe. Now, you have Lutherans fighting against Catholics. You have Calvinists fighting against Catholics. Any state that has converted. So, like, for example, the Swedes convert. They go to war against the Catholics. Northern Germany, you have wars. The armies of Charles V are trying to stomp out Protestantism. Within France, our friends, the Huguenots, come into it because there is there's going to be a religious war called the War of Three Henrys, where you have three different guys, all named Henry. Henry III, who was the king. His last name was technically Valois. He was a Valois monarch. I wouldn't fret too much about the Valois monarchs. It's the Bourbon monarchs that tend to be tested a bit more. Henry of Guise, who was a Catholic aristocrat, and he wanted to kind of change everything and make himself king. He saw an opportunity here. And Henry of Navarre who wanted to marry into the Valois family with the niece of Henry III, and that was Margaret of Valois. Anyway, Henry of Navarre was a Protestant, and he Joe, when you're all over the place, man, just chill. Navarre is going to ultimately be successful. He is going to be the one to win the war. Don't worry about the actual fighting in the war. They kill each other. They assassinate each other. Henry of Navarre is left. He converts to Catholicism with the famous line, "Paris is worth a mass." Pardon me. And he is, although he converts, is still going to be very, very friendly to the Huguenots. Some people say he never really changed in his heart. Some people say, he did. He just felt some sympathy because they were all Christians. Whatever it is, he passes the Edict of Nantes or Nantes in 1598. And he says basically Huguenots should be left alone. They can establish their own cities. They're walled off, and they can do their own thing. So that's that. He is going to be the first of the Bourbon monarchs. There will be many more. Most of them are named Louis. Okie dokie. Lutheranism or Calvinism, what was more dominant during the 30 Years' War? Well, both, because they were kind of on the same side. You see, there were a series of wars, don't worry about all of them, but the Habsburg-Valois Wars establish essentially a couple of things. For one, they establish that the princes of Germany can do their own thing. You might remember the princes of Germany had formed together, Calvinist and Lutheran alike, as the Schmalkaldic League, which is a crazy name, I know, but that's what they were named. And they had essentially said, look, bros, we are very much going to fight against you. The Catholics lose. And they say, look, now we've got the Peace of Augsburg. Peace of Augsburg is 1555. And the Peace of Augsburg states, he who rules his religion. So it says, listen, Catholics, leave us alone. Whatever the prince is, that's going to be the subject's religion as well. But it's only a choice of Lutheranism or Catholicism. Well, the Calvinists are like,
okay, well, good that we won, but what about us?
And so they will push for more representation. Ultimately, they will receive it during the 30 Years' War and its conclusion in 1648 in the Peace of Westphalia, where then Calvinism is added as an acceptable choice to the prince's religion. Now, the Treaty of Peace of Westphalia is pretty important, but the entire 30 Years' War is pretty important. But before I get to the 30 Years' War, which is kind of a whole hunk of knowledge itself, are there any general questions about anything I just talked about? It looks like Shelwyn asked, what family names should we pay attention to? The Habsburgs over in the Holy Roman Empire, later in Austria. The Bourbons, that's going to be over in France. Although the term Valois should not be shocking to you. You should go like, oh, Valois, French. But I wouldn't worry about them as much as I worry about your Bourbons. In my class, I'm going to push for them to know all of the Bourbon monarchs. But basically you do, because they're all the Louis. 13, 14, 15, 16, 18, and Charles X and Louis Philippe. Those are your boys, your Bourbon boys. Okay. Others over in England, you've got the Tudor monarchs. We'll talk about them in a minute. You've got the Stuart monarchs. We'll talk about them in the next review, which will be on Friday. the Romanovs over in Russia, but again, they're more of a period 2 kind of thing. Because at this point in history, they're still ruled over by the Mongols. So we're not really worried about them so much. Kim, and answer your question, the Peace of Augsburg. Peace of Augsburg is 1555. He who rules is religion. Naya, is it Lutheranism or Lutheranism? Lutheranism. Sometimes I'm tired, so maybe I said Lutheranism, but it's Lutheranism. Any questions before we move on to the 30 Years' War? And then I'm going to backtrack over to England because they kind of got a weird thing going on. I'll pause for a sec. Any questions about the Reformation or religious wars? Maybe, is there anybody else you should know? I'm obsessed with Ulrich Zwingli just because I like his name. He's a Swiss humanist that's influenced by Luther, who teaches the Bible from A to Z, the scriptures from A to Z, starting with Genesis and going all the way to Revelation, A to Z being the beginning of the Bible to the end of the Bible. Defenestration. We're not there yet, my dude. Any questions about? Nope. Everybody knows about defenestration. Nobody wants to know anything about that. Yeah, it is 30 Years' War. Okay, well, I guess let's move to the 30 Years' War then. You guys seem very excited about it. Okay, so the 30 Years' War starts off in 1618. Now remember, the Habsburg-Valois Wars, which basically is religious warfare between the Catholics and non-Catholics, the Lutherans and the Calvinists over there in Central Europe. That's going to continue. And, okay, Shelwyn, so what's your question, my dude? Don't say, oh, I have a question. Say, what is the question? Oh, wait, never mind, he just said. Anyway, so in Bohemia, which is part of the Holy Roman Empire, there are Protestants. Because again, it's kind of in the northern part. And these Protestants have issues with a Catholic tax collector. The Catholic tax collector wants to collect taxes. They're like, we don't know that. We don't know the Holy Roman Emperor anything. You know, we're Bohemians first and Holy Roman second, and blah blah blah. We don't know the Habsburg Emperor anything because again, Holy Roman Emperor Habsburg, and essentially they throw him out a window. That's defenestration. So defenestration means to throw someone out a window. It's not a very common word, but it's a wonderful word. So they toss him out a window. He doesn't die. And Shelwyn just asked a question. Women. Good question. So anyway, they throw him out a window. Catholics say that angels spirit him down gently to the ground so he's unharmed. The Protestants are like, no, he fell in a bunch of poop. They don't say poop. They use a different word. Anyway, that kicks off the Catholic desire from the Habsburgs, the Holy Roman Empire, to put the Bohemians in line. Now, they are successful. But when they're successful, this kind of triggers the French. Now, you might be like, wait a second, French? The French are Catholic. The French are very Catholic. But they see this as an opportunity to weaken an enemy. And that enemy is the Habsburgs, who have been dominant in Central Europe for a long time. So what they do is they say, yo, can you guys, maybe we should help out those Protestants. And people are like, wait a second, France, help out the Protestants? And they're like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. If the Protestants weaken the Holy Roman Empire by taking away power from the Holy Roman Emperor, then we become the most powerful empire in Europe. And that's possum for us. Possum. That's what cats say when something's awesome. So, yeah, Bohemia, modern day Bohemia would be the Czech Republic. Yeah, but back then they were They were that. A region of the Holy Roman Empire. Yeah, absolutely. I do think Prague is where that is where this happened. Anyway, so the defenestration of Prague happens. That kicks off this French desire to be like, yo, we should help out. So they start helping out these different other forces. They kind of work behind the scenes. And there are 4 major phases of the 30 Years' War. You got big, dogs, swim, fast, which is the mnemonic I use in my class. Big being Bohemian, that's the first phase. So you know who's involved. It's the Bohemians versus the Holy Roman Empire. Second one, dogs. D is for Danish. That's the Denmark, the Danish. They're going to go over. First round, Bohemians lose, Catholics win. Second round, Danish lose, Catholics win. Third round, S, swim, Swedish. Gustavus Adolphus, who if you've never seen a picture of, do yourself a favor, go Google him. He is just swagged out. He is going to also be unsuccessful. Catholics win. So the French finally are like, listen, if you want something done, you got to do it yourself. So they're like, fam, we are going to go over there and we are going to lay some smack down. So the final phase is the French fast or international phase of the war, wherein the French go in and ultimately they are successful. This ends with the Treaty of Westphalia, aka the Peace of Westphalia. I've heard it written both ways. Peace of Westphalia is correct. And Sarah Cole just posted, who else is confused? I don't know what to do with that. So keep in mind, it's a video, so you can always go back and rewatch it. So that's the Peace of Westphalia. Liam just asked a question. The Edict of Nantes gave them walled towns like La Rochelle. Who was the leader that invaded them? That's a period 2 kind of thing, but that's going to be Cardinal Richelieu, with his desire to establish absolutism in France, is going to take away from these Frenchies independence in order to establish one king, one law, one faith. But we'll talk more about that on Friday. So let's talk real quick about England. I might have to cut this short. So real quick, let's do the fast version. Henry VIII wants a divorce from his wife. She cannot give him a male child. She is only producing females or children that don't make it past 5. The female she produces is a little girl named Mary, and she is she ain't that ain't it, Chief. So Henry is going to divorce her. Problem, in the Catholic Church, you can't get a divorce. He asks the Pope for permission. Now, the funny thing is, normally they would swing this, and they'd just be like, oh, okay, yeah, let's make it happen. Get Henry a new wife. Make an exception. But I already said the dates, you goose. 1555 comes before 1648. So Augsburg comes before Westphalia. Anyway, so the king, Henry VIII, is forced to, he says, hey, I want a divorce. The Pope's like, oh, can't do that right now because Luther is making me look real bad and questioning all of the popes and saying that we're selfish and we only make decisions based on what benefits us. And so if we make a decision that only benefits us and give special treatment to you, Henry, instead of following the word of God, that's going to be bad, fam. So, no. Also, the wife of Henry VIII, who was Catherine of Aragon, that's Ferdinand and Isabella's daughter. This might be more information than you require, but I'm just kind of trying to give it a larger sense. She is she's going to have her nephew be running around in Rome at the time. And so he will be there next to the Pope. And it's like, well, if the Pope acts up, that's going to be a problem. So anyway, he's going to establish his own religion. It's going to be the Church of England, aka the Anglican religion. A lot of people want to obsess about his wives. Honestly, you don't really need to do that. What you need to know is that Henry VIII is he establishes a supremacy of the church. He establishes where the king is in charge of it, not the Pope. The king is going to appoint out everybody else. The Queen of England is still today. Elizabeth II is still the head of the church. And this is, did Henry invent divorce? No, there's been divorce since ancient times. So no, he does not invent divorce. In fact, usually the Catholic Church would just allow it. But again, because there was a weird situation going on. Anyway, her nephew was Charles V. I'm sorry. Her nephew was Charles V, Nicole. So, so he says, yo, guess I'm gonna start my own religion. And the major difference is that the king is in charge. He confiscates all the Catholic land and then gives it to his nobles to make them happy, to shut them up. So that's that. I gotta bounce because I'm interrupted. Save any other questions. We'll resume this on Friday. I will count all the people who were participating, even Sarah with who invented divorce. There's been a divorce since there's been marriages, so don't worry about who invented it. It was probably some guy. I don't know, some ancient dude. There's divorces in the Bible. There's divorces in ancient Egypt. There's divorces in ancient Greece, Rome, etc. And all of these were significantly before. Anyway, I gotta bounce because I got to. I will have the next one at 3 o'clock. Write your questions out ahead of time if you could, so that way you don't ask a question that just says women. And yeah, so love you lots. Let me know if I can help with anything else. Bye-bye.